And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Supply Chain Talk. Hello. Good to see some new faces, I think, this week. Last time we were here was my colleague Duncan Brock, and he was presenting a fantastic, interesting session on innovative packaging solutions. And we had a couple of really great speakers, and I think those of you that attended, I think, really enjoyed it, which I think is lovely. This week, we're going to be talking about something that's very close to my heart, and probably all of yours as well, because we've been going through quite a lot of change recently, and we're going to be looking at how we enable our teams to adapt and thrive in this environment of constant change. For those of you that are new to the Supply Chain Talk, we're not going to have any fancy presentations or any funky slideshows, anything like that. Just great talk with really interesting people. I've got a couple of really great guests this week that both of them have planning in their titles. So we're going to, I'm sure, talk a little bit about planning. And the way that we manage it is that every week we will have a news item. And we've got a good one for you this week. And we'll have a bit of time talking about that for about 20 minutes, talking about the news item and its relevance. And then we've got a few interesting questions, and we're going to sort of drill down into the specifics. The two guests that we've got are from a couple of different areas, from Avon and from Mars. So we're going to talk to them in a minute. We really, really encourage you to get involved with the chat. So if you've got anything that you want to talk to each other or talk to us about, please dive into the chat. And if you've got any questions you want to ask, please put that in the Q&A, and we will be delighted to answer them. And if there's anything in there I don't know how to answer, I will pass that on to the panel as well. Every week, we also have this beautiful mug that we give out, and I will be giving that out to the person that I think has contributed the best. Obviously, my judgment is final, so nobody can test in that, but I will get back to you, and we will make the decision, and we'll let you know right at the end. Without any further ado, hello, Eshwar, nice to see you again. Eshwar is one of our regulars at the Supply Chain Talk, so lovely to see you again. I think I gave you a mug last time you were on, which was brilliant. So without any further ado, I'm going to invite Agnes to come and talk to us. Hello, Agnes. Hello, are you there, Agnes? If you come and join us, that'll be brilliant. You're more than welcome, Eshwar. Yep. I think Agnes might be having a problem joining us. No? Okay. What I will do then is let's have a chat to Robert. Robert, do you want to come and join us for a second? Hello, are you there? Hello, Robert.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. A long time no speak. We actually had a quick chat last night, didn't we?
Yeah, very briefly. And well done, Eshwar, on winning the mug as well.
Yeah, excellent. Brilliant. Okay. So Agnes will join us in a second. But Robert, would you like to say a bit about yourself and a little quick about your background? That'd be lovely.
First up, apologies to the audience. Got a slight sore throat, but hey, resilience in supply chain. This is the first part, turning up. Robert Ford, live with my partner Melanie, have 2 children, worked in supply chain for about 10 years in various roles. I'm found to be a person who chases problems. So I started off in the planning department, and production weren't making what I wanted. So I moved into production managing, and then forecasting, demand planning. So I'm a person who generally tries to find problems in supply chains, and rather than point and see, I tend to go find and educate myself in it. So yeah, I've done various roles, and I've been with Mars now for about 5 years as a consultant as well as a full-time associate.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Robert. That's fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the article that we shared around. You know, a lot of the articles we've been reading recently are all about, you know, talking about problems and issues that we've been having. And actually, I think for us, it's just some more excitement and makes things more interesting for us as supply chain professionals, not least with what's been happening with some of the things that have been happening recently with our friend COVID. So this article has a bit of reference to that as well. And we're using an article around called Battered Supply Chains, which I think is quite evocative, and how Port Shanghai has been continually going back into lockdown, you know, causing real genuine issues, both to the manufacturing of the goods, but also getting the goods out of China, and how do we make our supply chains a little bit more resilient. So a lot of problems with supply chain disruptions, things like port closures and things like that, which we will talk about in a minute. Also the impact, we've all seen the impact if we've been working in technology supply chains, so things like semiconductors and things like that. There's a really great visual on the state of the ships waiting to go into ports. I think we were looking at it yesterday, Robert, weren't we? And I don't know if our Supply Chain Talk elf might be able to put up that visual for us. That'd be great. The great thing about the particular visual is that basically it shows the world with 1 million dots all across the globe of where ships are actually sitting, waiting to go into ports. And if you get a chance to have a look at it, I think that would be really good for you to do that. And at the time of the article, there was about 477 cargo ships waiting to go into docks, which actually, if you compare that to the Suez Canal issue, is probably not too bad, because I think when the blockade hit the Suez Canal, there was at least 500 ships trying to get through the canal. So actually, you know, perhaps it's not as bad as we thought, but who knows? If you've been waiting for your goods, it probably is quite bad. In that particular article, there was a good statement from Rob Hanfield, wasn't there, Robert?
Yeah, that's right. Rob Hanfield was, you know, very clearly pointing out that supply chain normalcy is not going to return very quickly. It's going to take some time, at least 2024, to return. And it also pointed out the varying levels of how we manage our supply chain, the quick turnaround impact of validating suppliers if we want to do nearshoring, and actually then the long-term incentives to really localize your production, localize your manufacturing, and the impact that will have on like local economies. Globalization is a wonderful thing, but the Suez Canal is a geographical disaster, you would have said at the time. It really kind of put supply chain under a lot of pressure. So yeah, is localization the way forward? I don't know. I do like the idea of having access to the world and the platform it provides.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, more opportunities. I think in there they were talking about shifting, you know, or actually looking to other places like Mexico and things like that to perhaps source from, so a lot nearer to where they were sourcing it across to China. So it does open up opportunities, don't you think, Robert?
Yeah, it certainly does. You know, if you look at Mexico's economy, you know, from a lower cost labor point of view, it's a fantastic place to really put your manufacturing. But it's not just about getting that low cost labor. It's about increasing the economy within that area, lowering your containerization kind of costs from China to US. It's huge. I think it's gone from around $1,000 or $1,500 way up to $8,000. You know, you're essentially paying the exact same service charge, just the same distance. So I think it's really important that we do bring a sheer nearshoring to kind of the surface. But, you know, again, this is the long term. It's not going to be turned around on a dime, as Robert Hanfield said. But I think it's important to build it into future resilience that we do with companies.
Yeah, exactly. I have got, I'm just trying to have a look at, so one of the questions I've got already from Ezra, so what do you think the best in class practices do you think are already evolving from some of these things that are happening, Robert?
I think best in class practice, you know, and I don't like to toot the horn about the politics generally, but if we look at, for example, what we did on COVID vaccinations, there was a lot of quick validations of suppliers, validations of vaccinations coming through. I think if you take that as an example and apply it to supply chain, it's how quickly we're able to turn around suppliers now. A lot of businesses that I have seen and you know, colleagues that work for other companies, they're validating suppliers in 6 to 8 weeks, when generally it's sort of 12, 18, 24 weeks of validation. They're really starting to kind of like streamline that process. And if anything, really pull out the non-necessities and really focus on the key components. You know, keeping cost good, keeping efficiency, quality, and health and safety, I think, are the most important parts. But I think for me, definitely within Mars, I've seen validations of suppliers happen a lot quicker, and how quickly we can turn the dial on setting up a rapeseed supplier compared to an oil supplier over here. It's been fantastic.
That's really interesting, actually. So really focusing on the things that are really important, and sort of stripping out anything that perhaps is that extra thing that we often ask for from our suppliers. So that we can actually turn around that supplier pre-qualification, etc., a bit quicker than perhaps we've done in the past. Yeah, that's interesting, actually. I noticed in the article as well, Rob was talking about, not just Rob, but others in the article, about how we then incentivise our suppliers. Do you do any incentivisation, particularly through, I don't know, through contracting, through relationships, where you are, Robert and Mars?
Myself personally, what I've always done when I did sort of buying and the commercial aspect was incentivize of being really transparent with like the 5-year, 10-year plan to suppliers. I'm kind of a traditionalist. I keep the same car insurance company I have for 10 years. I generally am not incentivized to move for £30 here, £40 there. I like the service I get. It comes at the right price for me. I kind of pass that on through suppliers. When I'm looking at suppliers to bring them on board, I'm looking at, will they support us on the 5 to 10-year plan? It's not get the money and get the cost of service goods right now, because you're revalidating suppliers on a yearly cycle, 2-yearly cycle. I'm quite a traditionalist. I like to keep the supply chain somewhat stable, and definitely this things like COVID, that's kind of turned the dime. The new Russia conflict in Ukraine, that certainly opened up some commodity issues we've had. So again, you're revalidating new suppliers.
Yeah, very good. Okay. And Esra, I was asking, actually, do you think we're going to see more sort of mergers and acquisitions, and perhaps more stability rather than racing around between supply chains and things like that?
I would like to think so. Again, you only have to look at like the food industry generally, or FMCG, the top 20 companies, and how many brands they generally own, and how many different mini companies that they're acquiring to again build their portfolio. The benefit of that is a network that's already set up and a clear pool of suppliers that they're pulling from. And if you're using the same suppliers, you can give them, more volume, which drives then better service, better engagement on relationships. So I do think we're going to see more and more acquisitions, moving away from SMCG. Tesla's just basically bought Twitter. And again, that's a clear move from a technology company based around electric cars, moving into a social media platform. What's that going to be used for in the future? I don't know. But I think across the board in all sectors, acquisitions will become more important in 10 years. It's a shame for me. I do like smaller businesses popping up and holding their own in the markets.
Yeah, because we went through a stage of really encouraging that, don't we? Yeah, we did as organisations, and it's nice to see that, actually, and that it creates much more sort of diversity within the supply chain, which is a nice thing to have. Well, what about? One of the interesting things I thought in the article as well was, the influence of governments. So, US Gov obviously pushing for more near sourcing to organisations, and actually, incentivising people to do that as well. But governments generally, do you think we'll see more influence around from governments in the way that we do our sourcing?
I think the bigger these companies get, tech companies, FMCG companies, the more the government has to look to regulate the monopoly that they're potentially getting. And with that, they can also look at regulating the monopoly, let's say, but they can also be champions and ambassadors of that company. When you're starting relationships with suppliers, being a small supplier into a larger scale, it can be very difficult unless you have somebody backing you locally, like a local MP, a local government official. If you can bring them on board, that's part of the package you're providing. You're providing, government backing, government funding, potentially through the elements of grants. So I think governments getting involved in business is really important, as long as they understand the business they're starting to regulate and try and help.
Yes.
That's super key for me.
Yeah, exactly. And collaboration, collaboration is such a big issue these days as well. So, I mean, how much does Mars collaborate across supply chains? Do you find you're doing a lot more collaboration these days? And how's that changing the way that you manage those relationships?
So Mars have 5 principles. One of them is mutuality. It's really about kind of setting the scene for both what you expect from a relationship, from a contract, but also what the supplier expects. In my current role now, where we have co-manufacturers, we're really open, really transparent. We have quarterly engagement sessions where we're really talking about the future of our brand as if it was part of their business.
Yeah.
I've kind of seen Mars maintain that great mutual approach in all the relationships and all the contractual approaches that we're doing. Again, it's more difficult in smaller businesses who are sort of, fighting day to day just to kind of make enough money and kind of, make a sensible P&L and make enough profit. Mars are very big business. And from my point of view, I love the mutuality principle. Again, it sets the supplier up for success, because if they're not successful, you'll have a fault in your supply chain, but it also brings stability to your supply chain, so you don't have to deal day-to-day issues. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, that's key. It's funny. I was doing some training this week with some students, and one of the things we were talking about was force majeure in contracts. And the more that we identify some of these, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about black swan events. So the more that we're finding out about these events that have a real impact on supply chains, obviously our legal teams are crawling all over our contracts to make sure that we sort of strengthen things like force majeure, and you begin to see that have an impact and becoming an exclusion. Things like no more pandemics, hands up, no more, marine waterway issues, will suddenly find its way into the force majeures. What sort of, how do you think that's going to impact on the contracts that we develop and in contract management for the future?
I think there's only so much you can make black and white before it starts looking like one of those mortgage forms that you have to fill in, and it's language that you just don't understand. And for me, it's about having what you would say in the past as a gentleman's agreement. It's a clear common agreement. We're both on the same page, and I think there's only so much you can put on paper without knowing that I trust in my supplier to, in a moment like a force majeure, they're not going to pass on the full cost of that to the customer. They're going to absorb some themselves. I've definitely seen that when it comes to my own personal bills. So I'm with a provider who's actually bought ahead of the market from an energy point of view. So I'm not getting a price increase in April. I'll get it in October. So they're taking some of the impact away from their customers, which is great. They've certainly got my buy-in in October because I'm now going to stay with them. I'm not going to go fight the market and try and find the best deal. So I think companies need to really focus on less of the black and white, and legal teams would kill us for saying that. It's about relationships. It's about people. Take away the paper, you've still got 2 people. So yeah.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, Robert, because that's kind of what I think as well. I've been saying that for years, but anyway. I suppose one of the things that's come out of that article that I find quite interesting as well is that you're beginning to go to different marketplaces to source products from, and those markets have very different cultures, different ways of working, different practices as well. Mexico and China being very, very different in many respects. So you've got to start thinking, and we're all doing this now. We obviously thinking even more closely about equality and diversity and diverse supply chains. So do you think that's having an impact on us as supply chain professionals? And what should we be thinking about?
Definitely onboarding different suppliers from different regions and going into different markets with different expectations, both culturally and from a functional process point of view. The big thing about me within like a business like Mars, 110, 120,000 people spread across the world, 100 factories. I get to speak to people from different countries and different expectations every day. So from my point of view, how I approach change, or the element of change, and how I collaborate is very different with people from France to people in America. I think you've just got to be very open. I think there needs to be more investment in the people training element of bringing other countries on board, rather than, like you say, a legal team being really super scrupulous about the ins and outs and the legal terminology.
Yeah.
Invest in the people, because I'm very fortunate. Such a big business Mars is. I get to speak to people from different cultures every day, and I'm learning to mature on how I approach change with a different country, a different culture than I
Mm.
would with my local team. Um, but yeah, it's certainly going to be more difficult. Globalization has already, for me, I'd say, somewhat hit a peak at times, and it feels like we're kind of like it's the norm at the moment. We're not going to see further expansion of global supply chains, like you say. I think now nearshoring is starting to be. We've expanded. We're now starting to come back in, and we'll see where that kind of sits and lies. But definitely, yeah, invest in your people from a change management point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I suppose one of my I don't know if it's a concern about that, but one of the conversations we often have is around how well we know our tier one beyond our tier one suppliers. Because quite often we really know our tier one suppliers really well, but we don't know beyond that. So so what's your experience of that, and how do you do that? How do you drill down into your supply chains a bit more? Yeah.
So I worked for a business previously, a dairy business called Eurelay, based in the UK. They're a French subsidiary. They're owned by two conglomerates, Urial and Later, and they had 3,000 farms. And
Wow.
what I actually found within our actual commercial team is, while we were a subsidiary and we used to bring in kind of like wheels of cheese and kind of cut them and pack them to the format required by the supermarkets, we were visiting the farms. We were looking at kind of like the dairy business as a whole. There was a lot of lobbying for dairy regulation and legislation in France, which then would impact the UK imports. So I think as we diversify our supply chain, it's super important, like you said, to go further back down the chain. There's one company that stands out for me at the moment called Tony's Chocolonely, do a fantastic bit of work in the end-to-end supply chain on cocoa sourcing. It's a complete open source book of, you can approach them and they will give you the 5 or 6 principles they source by, because they want people to be on board on that journey. And it really starts with farmers living a good life, all the way through to then passing on a product with a meaning and a purpose to the customer. So yeah, I've seen it in various businesses, and I'm inspired by a lot of that.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Actually, I mean, I think probably me, you, and everybody else on this call. I think sustainability and all of the issues that encompasses such an important part of a supply chain manager, procurement person's DNA now. We have to think about sustainability and the impact that we're making as well. So, and Eshwa's whole has actually asked, the whole thing about sustainability. Where do you see the role of our supply chains to deal with sustainability? Big question, I think.
Yeah, it's a huge question, sustainability. I'm a keen advocate for making big statements of, are we going to change the world in a day? It's not going to happen. And I think it's really about the fundamentals of what you do at home. An example of what I did at home, and I shared it with my team recently, was I get a Starbucks often. It's my sort of little treat. I sit in the car and I enjoy it. But I kept on getting the plastic cup. So I went and got one of those reusable cups where you get a bit of a discount, which is a lovely perk. And again, it's like, okay, that's one fundamental step. Okay, I'm going to make the effort on a Saturday to really split down my cardboard and strip away the additional layers of plastic. So I think educating our children to do it now will be the next generations of suppliers. I think trying to evolve the supply chains that we have now is going to take a long time. Just making fundamental changes of, do we really need to change the package on our item every 2 years from a marketing and a sales point of sense? Is that really what the customer wants? Or does the customer, if you want to get the customer in, I can change the packaging to make it look super appealing to you, but it's going to come at a cost, and the cost will be generally the environment. Is that what you would like to see? So being, again, really open, really transparent in what you're doing, I think is important. And that's where you're really going to win consumers on board.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. So we're struggling to get Agnes back at the moment. So we've got the supply chain elf is out there trying to bring her back, but she's failing miserably at the moment. Unfortunately, I don't know what's happening there, but anyway, she's going to do her best to bring her back, and then we can perhaps go back to Agnes and ask her a few more her view from an Avon's point of view on what we've been talking about in the article. So, I want to kind of expand on some of the things we've been talking about and perhaps move on to the main event, which is the whole thing about enabling our teams and therefore to adapt and thrive in all this change. A few weeks ago, I was hosting a supply chain talk, and I was chatting to a gentleman called Brian Palmer from Canaxis, and it was really interesting because we were talking about the importance of data. And can we actually forecast a black swan event? So that whole thing about early warning signs, tracking patterns and trends, and can we genuinely recognise when shifts in customer demand is going to happen, and if so, what do we do about it? And I just wondered, what's Mars doing, and how do you deal with that? And have you managed to predict these things that have hit us recently?
So COVID, no, I don't. I think that surprised everyone. That was a huge surprise. But what it's actually set about now is business continuity management is a huge thing for businesses. That resilience planning. It can also be seen as do we really need to sit down and actually do this because everything's working as it needs to be? And actually what COVID really did was highlight, if those plans aren't in place, things stop, and they just stop really hard. There's no traction at all. So I think we're definitely going to see more businesses really set about trying to forecast that event. And if they aren't able to give the tools or the skill sets to their associates to see that and actually foresee that, none of us have a crystal ball. What are the fundamental processes and skills we need in place to manage that? I think I've seen more businesses hire change management experts. I've definitely seen more businesses hire more health and well-being specialists. Essentially, when that big change comes, absolutely businesses will stop. But the impact on the person is the people that are going to restart the company. So again, you see health practitioners being brought in. You see a real focus on giving people the tools to not predict the future, but be ready and resilient to take it on no matter what comes before them. So yeah, that's been super important to me personally. I've worked in demand planning, and someone gave me the advice of, if you get the forecast right, you're lucky. And if you get it wrong, you're just wrong. So you're never right in forecasting. That's what I've been told. So for me, is I have the tool set to be resilient when those moments happen, and I know what I need to do to overcome them.
Yeah, exactly. And so from a business, so let's think about the higher level business here. What do you think the business needs to put in place to be able to do that for us, to ensure that we are that resilient?
So I think the dynamic we have now is, like, for example, we're all working from home generally. There's a lot of remote working. There's no expectation to be in the office as such anymore. That switch has definitely changed. Now, if I was to be in a crisis mode right now, I'd want my team around me in this very room, and we would just huddle and try and sort it. We need to enable through technology or through working collaboration hubs set up specifically for that. So if we go into a crisis, we know we bring people together physically, face to face. You just can't beat. You resolve problems a lot quicker, I find. I think that needs to happen. Geographically, we need to again be bringing our supply chains a little bit closer, or those that manage our supply chains a little bit closer. And again, I think leadership is super important. We mentioned the government, they're getting involved in a kind of businesses and kind of being an ambassador for those businesses. I think having somebody at the forefront of public kind of persona, really driving home the message of, like, be resilient, and change is a good thing. When things happen, stand up, hold your ground, and it will be okay. And here are the services such as health and well-being and retreat time. I think that's super important. Mars have a fantastic leadership group. The family are super involved in the business, so I know that on moments of when, like, this is going to happen, Grant Reed, the CEO, is going to step up and he will say something. And even just hearing that is brilliant, because you're not just in it on your own. There are other people looking at it at a higher level. So just kind of being a beacon of hope is really important, I think, in businesses.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that, actually. And I think, if you are giving people space. I think that's a really important thing when things are really going on, because we've known, I mean, for years, I can't remember when the book Shift Happens came down, but I mean, for years we've been talking about the fact that, you know, change just happens. And then we need to deal with it. I just think, you know, probably recently that some of the changes that we've seen have been globally impactful. So we've all experienced it all at the same time. And I think that's been quite an eye-opener for people. And, you know, I've certainly experienced, you know, people having much more empathy with one another across the supply chain, because we're all in the same issue, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, you feel sorry for people, don't you?
And definitely, and actually one of the experts I would always recommend anyone go read or watch a TED talk, or even go see them in person, is a researcher named Brené Brown, huge empathy expert, vulnerability expert. I recently read her book, Dare to Lead. Essentially kind of means, like, you know, a leader isn't just that the beacon who talks the most or has the image. A leader is somebody who really kind of takes responsibility for developing the potential both in people and the process. And not only that they can see that and take responsibility, but they have the courage to make it happen. It's so easy to try and develop people at a nice slow pace, thinking, I'm just going to go safe. Take the courage, be vulnerable, be willing to make mistakes. So I think empathy, vulnerability are super important in us as people before the business. And the more we educate people on that, like, be courageous. It's okay. You know, if someone's beating you while you're in the arena, be grateful you're in the arena. You know, I look at the person on the outside saying, why are you doing that? You know, I'm in admiration of the person being beaten right now. That's incredible. So yeah, I think we need to educate our leaders in doing that in the future. I'm fortunate. My girlfriend's a counselor. She has hugely matured me as a person doing that type of approach. I don't know if I would have been the same if I've not met my partner. So huge credit to her. So yeah.
Yeah, you need people like that around you, don't you, Bob?
Definitely in supply chain, when it can be very data driven, very analytical, very operational. It's so easy to forget someone's delivering it. Someone has a child, someone has a family, someone has a purpose outside of work. You know, and being okay with that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm the same. My girlfriend's very empathetic, so she's really good at saying, no, just think about that from a different point of view.
Yep.
No, that's really good. Yeah, excellent. So Eshwa's asking lots of brilliant questions this afternoon. So thanks, Eshwa. You're asking some great questions. One of his what kind of forecasting method do you think is probably the best for, you know, sort of identifying things like responsiveness and efficiency and things like that? You know, what would you do, and how is forecasting and demand planning becoming even more relevant in the world that we're now living in?
So I don't think too much has changed personally from what I've seen in how demand planning is being done. I actually think a lot of the resilience aspects of supply chain is your safety stock levels, your ability to have a quicker turnaround on manufacturing. I don't think, you know, from what I've seen, is when you look at forecast accuracy and you look at, you know, how accurate the forecast is, again, it's a complete crystal ball. There's only so much we can do we can get it to a point where 80% accurate, 90% accurate would be lovely. For me, I work really closely with my demand planning team on safety stock levels, minimizing production times. Like, what can I do in the lean aspect of manufacturing to enable being inaccurate and being responsive to issues? I think if anyone can find the magic solution to perfect accuracy and forecast, great place will be. You know, and when you look at just-in-time deliveries, just-in-time deliveries were set up on exactly that: right product, right time, at the right price. COVID hugely disrupted that. For me, I'm a big advocate for just-in-time, because, you know, it's very lean, it's very cost efficient, but actually at the same time, there's a hell of a lot of pressure when that forecast is wrong. So for me, it's about enabling like that nearshoring, your local manufacturing processes, having additional capacity in reserve, in warehousing and distribution. And again, having backup plans. I'm a plan B, plan C type of person. You know, plan A is great, but plan B is better because it's the one you go to. So yeah.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, actually, it was interesting. Yeah, I was having a conversation recently about that, the whole sort of just in time, just in case, and we talked a lot about things like Agile, trying to be much more agile in a lean environment, and I think up until recently, probably we talked about it a lot, but now we have to be it and we have to do it. And I think in a minute we're going to talk about, what the skill sets are, and Eshwar's asked about skill sets, and we definitely will have a conversation about the skill sets in a second. But I just wanted to ask you about, how do we ready ourselves for this change then? And, how do we, and perhaps it goes back to some of the things we've just been talking about, but, how do we drive and help our organisation as procurement professionals or as supply chain professionals? How do we help our whole organisation get ready for change?
For me, starts with perspective. I'm a huge advocate for, and I think I mentioned it in the way I approach how I've learned supply chain is when there's a problem, work with the solution, work to understand the solution, educate yourself, because it's very easy when something happens and let's say we're in demand planning and you've got manufacturing, the demand planning forecast is wrong. It's so easy for manufacturing just to point. The Department of Demand Planning has got it wrong. I think really broadening the perspective of everyone has a part to play, really training our associates to have active listening skills and perspective on the wider business impact. I'm a huge advocate for when I hear packaging changes are coming along. I start to really try and visualize, do you know how many cars that is in plastic? Do you know how many boats that would be in cardboard? Do we really want to be doing that? So again, bringing perspective, being super active in our listening. You're not going to stop all change. Change is good, but it's about filtering it through a broader perspective than your own. I think you mentioned it earlier. It's so easy when we look at our supply chain with supply chain lenses. You have my partner's brilliant at just being the devil on my shoulder. But have you thought about it this way? Oh, I haven't. Maybe I should. I'll go for a walk and then I'll come back and then maybe I'll approach it differently. So again, I think perspective, active listening, and embedding those skills nice and early on in a person within an organization. Traditionalism within work is huge within the British public, I would like to think. We love queuing. We like the way things are. But again, that's a really hard thing to change. So again, building those skills in the graduates that are coming through now and those that are educating themselves. I certainly do. I always ask my child to, have a think about it. Is that how we're going to go forward? And sometimes I get told, you're speaking too much like an adult, Tim, but I'm starting now because later it'll be really beneficial. And again, I think when we're starting to look at change and how we give people a skill set, move away from the analysis of the data. It's don't be pulling out of 50% of people this period are really happy, 50% are really sad. Data is really important. Move away from your graphs, move away from your presentations, and focus on the person, and have one-to-one conversations of what they need from a skill set point of view. Do they have the right technology to help them? Is remote working going to be working for them during a heavy element of change, or would they prefer to come in the office? Enable them to come into the office by paying for transport occasionally. There's loads of little things we can do to help our teams deliver.
Very good. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the interesting thing about that, isn't it, is that people respond to change in so many different ways. And actually trying to help people to not go into that horrible sort of shock, screaming, really concerned and worried, or some people going through that sort of whole denial. It's never going to happen. To me, so how do we, ensuring that we've got a culture that we've already built about change, so that people understand it's going to happen and they don't go into that terrible shock stage where they get, paralyzed by the change that's happening. And there's some, and that can be all sorts of things that happen. Obviously we're talking a little bit about black swan events here, but some of the little changes I think that sometimes happen in an organization can be the biggest thing that affect individuals.
Yeah. So I think it really starts of when I'm forming a team, I'm not looking for criteria as gender, age. What I'm actually looking for is how are they going to personally complement the other side. So how is planning going to complement purchasing? How is purchasing going to complement manufacturing? And by complement, I mean sometimes how can the devil tell the angel what it needs to be doing? So like, how can you be really black and white or a completely different side of the equation? Huge diversification of kind of like your experience within your team and experience at different levels. That for me has hugely helped. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes I've brought a team together that on paper shouldn't work, but it
Yeah.
does work because it's so complementary. And yeah, and I think that for me is a huge thing. Right at the recruitment stage, being really clear. I'm not here just to recruit on paper what they can do. I'm here to recruit their resilience and their life experience, which is why a lot of the recruitment process I go through is a presentation on what's your proudest moment? Is there a moment in your life what you wish you could have changed? And if you would change it, what would you have done? It's a real personal moment for them, but it helps me open up of like, okay, that's how they would approach it on a personal level. Now I think I know how they would apply it in business rather than tell me about a time when you've had good customer service. It's a great
Yeah.
question, but it doesn't tell me about them. That, you know, I'm hiring a person. So, yeah. And we just had a good shortage, a question here actually from Eshel
Yeah.
around huge shortage in skilled manpower and how do we augment manpower shortages? I think, again, for me, using the manpower that you have, I come from a factory background of an operator on line 1 couldn't use line 3. Why? Make the time to cross train them, make the time for departments to be responsible for another area. So quality food safety, looking after operations for a week, you know, give them that perspective, give them that opportunity, being really flexible in your geographical reach. You know, we have manpower shortages. I live in the countryside, Somerset. You've got Bath, Bristol, Taunton, Yeovil, they're your biggest places. Apart from that, it's little villages. Putting on transport for them, bringing them in further afield, incentivizing them through compensation packages to say we'll cover your transport costs. Essentially, that's why we've put the additional salary on. I think that's super important. And then another thing I would also say when you actually are looking at manpower is work with local colleges, further education, and really put you on the radar. We don't do enough, I don't think, to really push the apprentice scheme within the UK. It's something that for me is, I think like maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I look at some of the peers that I've had, they've all come through apprentice schemes.
Yeah.
They learned on the job. And I really think, Mars do a fantastic job in that. They have an apprentice scheme, they have a graduate scheme, and we have some fantastic leaders come out of them, some real functional experts. Engage locally your business with a local college. Give them an afternoon of an opportunity. It pays dividends in the end. Invest now to get later.
I totally agree. And what I love about the current leadership program is the whole thing about behaviours. Because often we can give people knowledge, we can train people skills, but this whole thing is about encouraging different behaviours as well, which, as you said, in this time of change is really, really, really important for us. So
Yeah.
anyway, one of the things that we should talk about is obviously while we're leading organizations to make changes, we've got to think about new skill sets potentially. And I just wanted, do you think what are the new skill sets that have been that are coming out of the types of things that have been happening to us recently, and perhaps not just about skills, perhaps the behaviors. It might be worth us touching on that as well.
So for me, I think there's been a huge change definitely been a huge change in what we're looking for in the behaviors of the people driving change. Again, I've mentioned a lot of companies now are putting a lot of formal training behind it, giving them essentially framework of when you're managing change, you have to respect, engage with everyone at every level, really understand your audiences and the personas that you're going for, build a profile of the 4 ways it's going to impact. Because if I was to say I'm moving factory A from this location to this location and I just did it generically and that was my level of communication, it won't work. It's look at the audience that you're looking at, break them down into subset groups of that's an ally, they're on board, that's actually a bit of an enemy at times. We really need to over communicate and really understand how they're going to do it. So I think one of the main behaviors is having the right amount of time to drive change and like giving it a real people push. The process really hasn't changed. over communicate, be really clear on what you expect of them. And fundamentally, sometimes it's going to happen. And there is always going to be some people that you can't win over. But I think it's a lot easier to take a message that you don't like from somebody who presents it in a way of like, they do understand, but there's not much they can do. Don't shoot the messenger is what I would say. Is like really help them to kind of like be a people person, somebody who can listen, really document people's experiences, collate, and have like a real feedback process. What I've seen is like change comes, it's like we're changing this, and you hear about it once and then it happens 6 months later. Where's that continuous feedback to alleviate people's concerns at different levels? And I think that's been a big change for me. I've seen that introduced more and more recently.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I lost you a little bit there, Robert. I don't know if it was my side or your side, but I just froze. I missed the last thing or the last couple of things that you said then. But do you want to can you remember what you said? Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is I've seen in the last sort of like 6 months to sort of 12 months where we've had this huge element of COVID change. People, businesses move away from communicating once to that constant feedback. An example would be we had daily briefings on COVID from the government. You might not have liked the message, but the message was consistent. It was there at a time, you understood it, and sometimes you're never going to like the message, but you're going to get this constant feedback of how things evolved. I think Brexit would be an area where I would say at times we didn't have that constant feedback, that loop in. It was like Brexit's going to happen. 2 years later, we're still in this weird situation. Where was that like monthly periodic huge Brexit update from a transport, from a logistics, from an operational sense? I didn't see it. And I felt like I was out of the loop till suddenly someone said, you got to comply with this new legislation or this new regulation. Oh, great. I wish I'd have known some steps were going towards it. So I think that's definitely developed in businesses, the idea of like, we're going to change, you're on the journey with us, not you're going to change, see you in 6 months when it happens, you're out of the loop. That's definitely become more apparent.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Esra, I was just asking about CSR. So is CSR still a thing? And how much of this have we been witnessing during these disruptive times? And where does the supply chain sit in that role for CSR?
I think corporate social responsibility. Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, I was just looking at to be sure. Yeah. So how much of this can be witnessed during disruptive times in supply chain realms, corporate social responsibility? I think it's difficult. I think like most businesses, we want to deliver on our social promises, be it sustainability, offsetting carbon, and et cetera, and it really starts to become difficult when you're not managing the same margin levels, you're not managing the same volumes. I think during disruptive times, companies that I've seen work really well where they've delayed, for example, like the launch of a packaging, or they've launched something and actually they're having to re-pull it because they can't get that paper and they need to resort back to the plastic they've used. Just being really clear on the reasons why. I'm okay with the social responsibility of businesses slipping because I have a personal social responsibility to put my 2 pennies worth into society. So I'm quite relaxed. I don't hold big companies to account for them when they suddenly go from we're going to do this to going to do that, and they completely flip a switch on their social, their social impact.
Yes. Yeah. No, I totally agree, and that's right. I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of organisations recently around how we're viewing sustainability, and asking people how do they view it. Is CSR still a thing? Is it ESG, environment, social and governance? Is it sustainability? And I'm finding that a lot of people are actually beginning to really buy into sustainability being the word to use, because I think people are beginning to understand what that actually really means, and then really focusing in on, okay, so how do we look at ways of trying to reduce an element of carbon out of our supply chains, something we can't do overnight. So, let's baseline it. Let's look at where we are now. Let's start to set some genuinely realistic targets that we can meet. Looking at supply chain diversity, how can we make our supply chains a little bit more diverse? Robert picked up things like health and safety as well, and bringing that into it as well. So how can we make sure that our people within our supply chains are well looked after? And that's really key. And then there is the whole governance thing about making sure that whatever we're doing is, is open, transparent, it's ethical, and that's really key, as we all know, as well. So but it's how can we do that in the environment that we are working in, and we have to think about that. And when organisations do move, if you're moving your supply chain operation from one side of the world to the other, is doing that analysis and really finding out what's happening in that country that you're moving to, and what do they think about sustainability and how do they operate. I think is becoming more and more important. Would you say so, Robert?
Yeah, definitely. So look back 10 years, the accountability of, I would say, protein providers to the retailers. I think that the idea of farm to fork was a huge thing, really understanding where our product comes from. We're a very consumer-driven species, I think, at times, a bit too much, definitely within the plastics, the electronics industries. But when you actually look at like where you're sourcing your product from, and you absolutely know they have that backward traceability, not only because of the elements it's going to have on the environment, so the cattle, but how the cattle are treated, how are all the actual staff treated. More and more recently, I've seen companies approach me on health and safety records for my business and product personal liability kind of thing. So they're not just looking at like, it's a really good product, how do we get it at the right price to get it on the shelves? Is like, how are you looking after your staff? Because I want to be in relationship with somebody who cares just as much about the product they're selling than the people who are actually creating it. And again, very lucky. I work for Mars. Yeah. Quality is one of our main principles, responsibility as well. So again, being responsible individually and also as a business, but driving that quality. The consumer is our boss and our associates are our bosses as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of my learners are going to probably get upset with me here, but I think you will understand, Robert, that particularly working in planning, I think data and being a good analyst of data is becoming more and more important. So we as supply chain, we've got to get our head around numbers, and there's a lot of people, we shy away from numbers a little bit, and I think we've got to get much better at looking at numbers and really working out what that means to us. And I'm sure, Robert, that's something that you do on a daily basis.
Numbers are close to my heart. Can I form a sentence on an email well? Probably not. I definitely grammar check that and put it through various apps before I'm happy. Give me a spreadsheet, I'm in heaven. I'm no expert, but I certainly think the skills of understanding the importance of how data can be transformed into information and really then providing them the people context behind it. You can have metrics on how many people leave your business. It's just a number. It's great. It gives you a steer, but what is actually now the context behind it, the commentary? So I'm really looking, when I'm looking for an analyst, I'm looking for somebody who is broad perspective, understands if you drop a stone into a sea, you see the ripple effects, go chase the ripples as well. Don't just drop the data, go see the impact of that data and the trends we can form from it. That's been hugely important. And at heart, I'm an analyst. I like to look at numbers and say things are wrong, but I'm not one to point the finger and say, make them right. It's how do we make them right? How do we get them into a transformative state?
Exactly. Right, I'm very keenly aware, Robert. You've been talking. We knew you had already had a bit of a cold, and you've been propping up this supply chain talk. So thank you so
Resilience.
much. Very resilient, and I hope I'm sure we will get Agnes back for a future supply chain talk, because I know she had some fantastic things to talk about.
Oh, definitely.
And we're feeling really sorry for her, because obviously her technology's let her down. Or our technology's let them down, but I think it's probably Agnes's, sadly. So now, Eshwa, also, final question. You'd actually asked about research and development. Eshwa, keep an eye on the SIPS website. If there's any good research and development, we do put things on there. A lot of universities doing a lot of work on supply chains at the moment. And lots of private organisations as well. So, but perhaps we'll pick it up at a future event. Just to say, I think the supply chain mug. I'm going to do it again. I think, Esra, I'm going to send you another supply chain mug because you've asked some fantastic questions tonight. So you got 2 of them now, matching pair. I'm afraid it's going to be the same colour. But in future, maybe we can have a word, see if we can get some different colours. But this is for you, okay? So I'm going to send it to you.
Congratulations, and thank you for the questions. Yeah, they were certainly good.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And Robert, thank you so much for tonight. Really good, really insightful, some fantastic stuff coming out of that. We're going to have the next episode is on the 4th of May. I think it's me again, actually. So we're going to be looking at the end-to-end supply chain stewardship, which I think will be very interesting on the 4th of May. So please come along and attend, and tell your friends to come along as well, because I think we are talking some really great and very experienced people with some great ideas. So again, thank you very much, Robert. All the best. Hope you have a nice evening. I hope your cold gets better soon.
Certainly. Yeah. No, thank you. No, thank you for having me on. And again, thank you for the questions. Yeah, it's been really good. Thank you.
Brilliant. All right. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, everyone. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.